Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. I'm Executive Director Xander Marine, and I'm joined here by producer
Andrew Marine.
And we'll be talking about the origin story of PioneerTV today. So who started the program?
Well, this started back in the fall of 1994 with Mrs. Diana Hadley. And at the time, there was also an assistant principal, Jerry Brown. And the two of them worked together to get started with a program called Channel 1. That was a national news program geared specifically to teenagers. And so they had TVs that were installed into each classroom, and they could be controlled directly from one box in the control room of the first studio. And when you hit that, all the TVs turned on, and the Channel 1 program began. And it was about a 12-minute news program. But then within the school day, right after that, another 3 to 5 minutes could be used for local programming, and that's when the program began.
So how did you come to teach the program?
Well, it took a while before I was part of it. I graduated from Mooresville High School in 1994, in the spring of 1994, so I totally missed the opportunity to be part of the broadcast program. And I was a yearbook co-editor, and I'd been part of that program for 3 years. And so that was my experience in high school. So I was not even a part of this until I ended up being hired at Mooresville High School. That was in the fall of 2003, and that was the last year Mrs. Hadley was part of that program. And so I was able to witness her final year, and I was able to learn the ropes of it in the spring semester of 2005, so that when the time came, or actually 2004, the fall of 2004, spring of 2004, I should say, I was able to get the ropes there so that in the fall of 2004, I was able to take on the reins of following up in Mrs. Hadley's shoes.
So you mentioned that you graduated high school the spring right before the program. If you had the chance to be in the program, would you have been in that program, or would you have just stuck to the yearbook and only the yearbook?
I would have gone to broadcast. Absolutely.
Is there like a specific thing that would drive you to be in that program?
I like the visual storytelling. There's nothing wrong with print. I love print. I love writing copy, telling stories in a yearbook and some newspaper, but more in the yearbook. I like the long form of writing rather than the short term writing. But I have an eye for motion visual work. And so, yes, I definitely would have gone broadcast if it had been available to me.
It's a very interesting thing that you just graduated right before it started, and then you came back to Mooresville High School, and you got the opportunity to teach what you missed out on from the high school experience as far as that program went, since you didn't have it.
And kind of to follow up on that, how I became involved was I was hearing Mrs. Hadley in the teacher's lounge during lunch just mention that no one seemed to be wanting to take on that. And I'm like, well, I do video editing as a hobby. So I went to see the principal, Mr. Chuck Muston, and I just let him know I'm interested. And I was hired to do it. But really what motivated me to even have that conversation with Mr. Muston was my brother, Greg. Greg was able to be a part of those first years of the broadcast program. He was in the inaugural year in 1994. And he graduated in '96 and stayed on after graduation to help out Mrs. Hadley with the program. And so I knew that Greg knew the program well. And so I asked him if I would do well in it. He says, not only would you do well, I will train you. And so my brother trained me on some of the ins and outs of the program, and I went from there. So I owe him a debt of gratitude for the motivation and the training in the early days of that.
So during his high school years, you mentioned that he was in the program. Did you have knowledge of this and the program during that time, or were you solely focused on your own studies to become a teacher?
I went to Indiana State University as an English education major, so become an English teacher. But I did know about the program well enough that, as I said, I did this as a hobby, and so I had recorded video and taking still images and so forth at Indiana State University with my Christian campus ministry I was a part of. And so I came back to Mooresville and put together highlights videos for that group from the studio of Mooresville High School. So even though I was never a part of that program, I was fully aware of it, and I had some access through Greg to be able to make some of those videos that I did not have access to at home. And so, yes, I knew of it, and I got to participate in some of the equipment well before I was hired at Mooresville.
That's actually really interesting that you got to be a part of it without being a part of it and then eventually come back and teach it. And you were saying that you didn't have the access to the stuff at home, but you had it in the studio. So why don't we get like a description of some of the stuff that you had in this studio?
Well, there was one computer that was in there. It was called the Video Toaster. And so it was a very primitive nonlinear editor. And so I could ingest the video and still images into that. It was a tower computer. And I was able to export videos from it. It took a while. I mean, in those days, you would hit the space bar and you let it go. I mean, you hit the enter key and you let it go, and then the next day you come in and see the final product. So it wasn't one of these things where it's a matter of minutes or a matter of a couple of hours. This was, you leave it and then come back. In fact, that Video Toaster, at one point, Greg toasted it. It literally caught fire.
That's definitely pretty interesting for your only computer and your only thing to just catch fire.
Yeah, most of the editing that they did was linear editing, so it was tape to tape. But there was that Video Toaster that could do some special effect kind of rendering and so forth. It was in its very primitive days.
So that's in the early days of that program. We'll get to this later, but we actually have gone through 3 different studios. Not gone through. We're on our 3rd studio at the moment. But in that first studio, you talked about the early days. You had the one computer. By the end of the life of the first studio, what did it look like?
Well, when I came in 2004, that Video Toaster was long gone. And there was some linear equipment that was brought in just prior to my arrival. It had 2 tape decks that were your A and B, and then it had a master one. So there was 3 VCRs, and there was even a console there that allowed you to do the cuts, and you could even have a scroll wheel that you could go frame by frame on a tape. So I mean, it was actually pretty advanced material, although it was legacy. It was older equipment that was handed down to us. So I learned how to work with that equipment, and we were using it. There was one computer that was sitting on the shelf that had not been used in a while. It was collecting some dust, and I saw that. I was like, I pulled it down, It looked like a VCR, but it was a little bit bigger than a VCR. But it was made to look like a VCR. It was black and everything. But the name of it was Casablanca.
Is there a story behind this name?
The White House, and it was a black box.
Weird.
Exactly. Now, some other iterations of Casablanca were white, but this model was black to look like a VCR. And it was another primitive nonlinear editor. It would allow for only 3 video layers and I think only a couple of audio layers. That's it. And I started working with it to get it working because the principal was not too happy that it was just sitting on the shelf. So I pulled it off the shelf to make sure that it was working, and I got it working. And I showed him what we were doing with that equipment. And I also showed him, okay, so here's some other footage of what I did with using the Casablanca and a computer I had at home. I said, can you imagine what this would look like if I had another computer? He purchased a computer for us. It was our first Windows-based computer that we used. So I used the Casablanca and a Windows computer using Adobe Premiere Pro on that one. And we started producing things. And so later on, I showed him, okay, so here's what we're doing with these two. Imagine if we had a whole lab. Because I showed him some things that I did with those two plus my computer at home. And he was convinced. And we had 16 workstations added.
That's quite a big number. How many did you actually have in the program at the time that would be able to justify the number of computers that were brought in?
Well, as I was part of the program started growing. It started with one official class in the morning, but in another unofficial one where Mrs. Hadley had all of the techie students together. There was 2 or 3 of them in another period together. It was actually, I think, during her prep period that they were in there. And so it morphed into, I had 2 classes of broadcast at that point. And so I had more students joining in, and so it grew to in the 30s at that point. And so justifying having 16 workstations, that old studio space that we had a studio and then another room that became the computer lab that we had. But it was very small. It was right next to the old library, and it was very, very narrow, and it even had a storage area that used to be a darkroom, a wet darkroom, but they had long since not been that used anymore. So what we did with the computer lab, we had these portable carts where they all sat on the carts, and we had 8 on one side and 8 on the other side, and they were back to back to each other. So I could never see all 16 screens at the same time. They were facing in opposite directions. But that's the best that we could do in that small space. And so it was a U shape. And when everybody was in the room, it was pretty tight. I mean, it was hard to walk around in that space. But that's what we had. And so at that point, we had basically 18 computers. And so we grew from there. Eventually, we ended up having, in that space, up to 3 classrooms, 3 classes. We had 2 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon.
It's quite interesting how you're able to build that program. So how did that continue into the second studio, and why did the second studio become a thing?
Well, it was time for renovation, and the space that we were in, at one point, it was literally separating from the rest of the building. It would created a crack in the along the seam, of the long end of the seam of it. The roof was actually separating from the wall, and we almost lost the lab at one point because the water was coming through, and I had to put tarps over the computers to save them. They eventually got that fixed. It leaked on 2 occasions, but the second one, it was going to cause some catastrophic failures if it wasn't fixed. And they ended up fixing that, but they were going to be repurposing that space. And so they decided to move the broadcast area over into what is now A115. There was already a lab in there with Mrs. Clark in the one back section. And so what they did was they added 2 inner walls in there to create a new studio. And then the lab was moved in there and took up an L shape. So once again, I wasn't able to see all of the screens at once. I was kind of close to that. I moved a desk to where I could see on either side of the L, but it was not ideal. And the 2 inner walls that were created were not insulated. So whenever we were recording in the studio space, we had to tell everyone in the lab space to hush because their sound would bleed in to into the studio. So that was not ideal either.
So at that point in the second studio, what programs did you still have going on? Because you mentioned that there was Channel 1. So was that still going on in that second studio?
Good question. In the first studio, just before leaving that studio, the superintendent at the time wanted to restructure some of the programs throughout the corporation, and part of that was rescheduling the instructional time. And so they wanted more instructional time, so they decided to take out Channel 1 because, that was taking up 12 minutes of potential instruction time. And so by doing that, it freed up some instructional time, but it also put us in breach of contract with Channel 1, so Channel 1 came and took all the TVs away. And so that really took away our vehicle of getting information out to the student body. And at that point, we went from, at that time, we had 4 classes, including one of them as a middle school class. So the program had grown to about 65 students at the time. And with the loss of Channel 1, that really hurt us. And so it started somewhat of a decline, and I can understand why. I mean, they had no vehicle for their content to really be getting out there. So that was unfortunate.
Do we have a time frame, like a year, that this roughly happened around?
My memory is fading a little bit. I'm not sure exactly when that was. It was in the teens. I would say in the teens. I'm not sure, 2000 teens.
Okay.
When that happened. I'd have to go back, but I'm not sure.
I would assume the early teens, like 2013, 2014, because the renovation, the full renovation of the school ended up happening, 2015, I believe?
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
Yeah. I think somewhere around there, yeah.
And with that full renovation of the school, that's where we got our third studio. Do you want to tell us how you came to acquire that third studio and the bigger space that it is today?
Well, there was certainly a recognition that that the second studio was inadequate for our needs, and I think we all understood that. The administration and we all understood that, and we saw an opportunity of brighter days. And so, when they decided to do a full renovation of the building, re-envisioning what spaces would look like, they decided to, as part of the virtual learning center, to create a new journalism lab. And so that space was going to be allocated to us. And the construction company came to us to go over some ideas that they had. And well, actually, more than that, they came to us and asked what we needed. And so I emphasized that we needed insulated walls. That was a very important thing that we needed. And so that, and be able to see all of the screens. So there's some things that I learned from the first studio and the second studio that went into the third studio. And when they came up with the rendered drawings of the space, they brought it to us and showed us the schematic. And when I saw the schematic, it was looking great. The lab space looked great. We had a control room again, which actually this was going to be better than our first studio control room, because that space for the control room was actually just on the other side of some glass, and it was right up against our lab. So, the 16 computers, narrow space, and we had right beside that the control room stuff. So it wasn't conducive for all of that. And then in the second studio, we didn't even have a control room. So to have a dedicated control room, that was wonderful. And so we had that plus some storage space. But the schematic had the storage space over by the office space for the librarian. On the other side of that was the boys' bathroom. And I had been in a classroom that was right next to a bathroom, and I heard every flush during the class time. And so I knew what that would sound like. And so I talked to the architects, and I asked them, could you move our storage room to be right next to the bathroom, and then have that soundproofed so that we could still use the studio space? And they said, oh yeah, we can do that. And so they did. And so I learned some things from 3 different spaces that contributed to the true design of our journalism lab.
And all of those changes are great for the new lab, especially being more open. I mean, you can see most of the computer screens all at once. I mean,
from the center of
the center of the room, yes,
you can see them all. So that was mission accomplished.
Yeah. And as far as recording went, I actually got a chance to see all 3 studios. The first studio, I was very, very young, elementary school, maybe even just before that. And I don't remember much of it, but I know it was small. And then I definitely saw the second studio. I remember not having a control room, and all the audio board and stuff was right in front of the set in the computer lab, just being right there. And then I'm actually having the opportunity to use the third studio well after it's been built, but still being able to use it with the equipment that's been provided for us. And I can say it's definitely the best equipment that we've had, and we have definitely learned from those previous experiences. And speaking of previous experiences, the channels that we've run, all the programs and stuff. So we've already gone over some of Channel 1, the 12-minute news show. So there were 3 different subsections of that. You had Wake Up MHS, AM MHS, and PM MHS. Do you want to explain what the differences between the 3 are?
Okay. So Mrs. Hadley had AM MHS and PM MHS. Those were the 2 foundational shows that went on these Channel 1 TVs. And so right after the Channel 1 program, AM MHS came on. And so that was the main news program that they ran with desk talents, picture-in-pictures, those PIPs, and some news packages. PM MHS was for late-breaking news announcements that needed to be done just before the bell rang for dismissal. And so I really liked having that program because, you know, today we usually have the principal come on with that. I love it when students can go on and share that late-breaking news. And anything that was going to be happening that night, a sporting event or a club meeting or whatnot, could be announced then instead of in AM MHS. So I had a chance to see that for the first year before I became part of the program. And so I really liked what they were doing there. When I became part of the program, I saw an opportunity to do some updates, some changes here. And so AMMHS is a mouthful. PMMHS is a mouthful. And so I thought changing the name of it to make more sense, easier to roll off the tongue, and to create some new synergy with our staff, that we would work together to come up with some names. And as a team, we came up with Wake Up MHS. That was easy to say. It worked. It was in the morning like that. And so I thought that was a good name for that. For the PMMHS replacement, that was a concept that I came up with, and the students really liked it. MHS Fast Break.
Fast Break's interesting that you had mentioned that, and that is really cool. That's our morning announcements now. What we announce in third period now. I completely forgot that replaced the PMMHS. But we have Fast Break now in third period. We go on at, 9:43? Just about then. And it's a small script, and we just read it out. That's all our morning announcements. That's really cool, and that is how the name came to be. How did that stick when we changed around from the video to the PA system?
Well, first of all, the name Fast Break, it should be fast. It should be short. And so in its original format, that made sense for the end of the day quick announcements. What we currently have today is another short news hole. We technically only have 1 minute of a news hole, and we try to keep it between a minute to a minute and a half, 2 minutes at the max. And so with that in mind, Fast Break still made sense. Even though it's in a totally different format, it's not visual, it's all audio. And the whole purpose for the audio, since we don't have Channel 1 TVs, I can't just turn on TVs in the classrooms anymore. The only way we can get a captive audience, I saw the possibility of using the PA system. And so when we moved into the new studio space, I talked with Dr. Brian Disney, about the possibility of being able to tap into the PA system to do this. And he was for it, and they brought in a toggle switch for us to be able to take over the PA system. And so from there, Fast Break was reborn.
That's really interesting. So that covers the faster news thing that we had and have now. But we had the 12-minute show. We now have more news, which our past two have been 20 plus minutes, right? So how did more news become the new, Channel 1 kind of news program?
For those students and community members that have not seen More News yet, More News the thought of it was born from a former student of mine who was the executive director back many years ago, Austin Webster. He came up with the concept of More, Moore, news, playing off the word Mooresville. And I really liked it. It stuck with me. I thought it was a fantastic name. And the vehicle at the time would be to put that on a YouTube channel. And so we had a limited viewership. We didn't have the captive audience that we used to have with Wake Up MHS or MHS Fast Break. But we did have a vehicle to get news content out there. And so More News was started. Now, it really didn't gain the steam that it has now until the third lab, where we really started tapping into the synergy of the program growing again. and in having the opportunity to use YouTube to get that More News show out. But really recently, with the changing from just being a high school broadcast class to a dual credit radio TV pathway for graduation, that really kicked it into hyperspace, where we've got shows that are 25, and the last one was a 27-minute show. It's got a lot of really good news and sports content in it that for those of you that are hearing this podcast, if you haven't watched these More News shows, start watching them, because some of these packages are really well done. That covers academics, clubs, sports. It's really impressive what the students are coming up with now.
Some local events are even being covered in those packages to be put onto More News. So it's not just school based; it's also community based.
Yes. I mean, we've had things like Victorian Christmas covered on it. We've got White Flag Games on the most recent one. And I know that in the near future here, there's a Key Club is sponsoring a carnival that's for the community. Yes, it may be one of our clubs covering this, covering a club, but it's also a community-based things for students with disabilities. And so I'm really excited about the various programs that are being highlighted in More News now.
Yeah, we've also covered things like the snowstorm that we previously had, and we compared it kind of to the past snowstorm of 2014, as well as what the e-learning had entailed, and when the students, had time to complete it if they didn't have Wi-Fi at home. So there's public announcements for the school, as well as just covering those local events.
Yeah. In the early days of More News, when we had it on YouTube, I've got to share this with you, is YouTube and I have a strange relationship, because we lost all of our content from YouTube on our original broadcast YouTube channel. We were banned from YouTube. Why? I don't know. I even appealed. What did we do to break the community standards? Nothing, as far as I was concerned. Now, we were live streaming live events from the South Gym, and so there was ephemeral music, which means it's background music. It was picking some of that up. Gold on the Ceiling was always... We kept getting struck with that one, that we weren't allowed to use it, but it would just kind of mute that one out. There was nothing we could do about that at the time. I don't know if that was the reason, but for whatever reason, we lost all the content. We were barred out, and we couldn't even transfer content if we wanted to. I was not happy with YouTube at that point.
We lost all of our progress from that, but we have come back with a newer YouTube channel.
Yes, it's the Mooresville PioneerTV YouTube channel.
It's space in between Mooresville and PioneerTV.
Yeah, and that YouTube channel is up and fully functional, and I'm pretty confident that one's not going to get struck. Part of that is we make sure that all the content is cleared through YouTube before it goes up, and all of our live streaming events, sporting events, are done through another portal. We use something called Blue Frame Technology. You can go to blueframetech.com to check out what they're all about, but our website is www.mooresvilleschools.org/PioneerTV. And there is where we have our Blue Frame widget on there that shows upcoming live events and on-demand events. And so we stay completely clear of YouTube when it comes to those live streams. And so we're not going to get struck with Gold on the Ceiling again.
Yeah, and you just spoke into my next point here with live streaming. We just talked about Blue Frame, but there was a mode of transportation before that for our live streams. It originally started with NFHS Network for a couple of school years, the 2014-2015 school year and the 2015-2016 school year. I had the opportunity to be a part of that as a sixth grader, as we needed an audio operator for the football games. So I had the chance to control some of the audio stuff for some of our very loud commentators at the time. Is there a reason that we went with NFHS Network?
Yes, we had an athletic director at the time that wanted to explore this. Zach Arrett was the athletic director, and he saw that there was an opportunity with the NFHS Network, and I was like, "Hey, this could be a vehicle for my crew," because at that point we had lost our Channel 1, and so this was an opportunity for my students to actually have some real world live experience with real audience watching in. NFHS Network at the time, with the equipment that we had, it allowed for a single cam or at least a single video source input into their software using what was called an Elgato. And it was just a little dongle that allowed for one composite video input, which was standard definition, and a left and right channel audio input using the RCA plugs. So that was it. That's what we had. So we had a single camera source and then an audio board going into it, so we'd have a couple of commentators. And so it was a very basic setup. But my program at the time was fairly small, and so it was, that's why I pulled you as a sixth grader to help out whenever we could with after school activities. But it was a seed. It was a start. When Mr. Mike Mossbrucker came back as the athletic director, he did not want to pursue NFHS Network anymore, and so that went away.
Yeah, it went away after 2 years.
Yeah.
But
the opportunity, a couple of years later, a few years later, we had the opportunity with live streaming starting to pick up pace in other places, including Mooresville. This was just prior to the pandemic. We started using YouTube to do some live streams, get some basic live streams in, and it was being successful. But right at about the time that Blue Frame came in, Blue Frame was the cavalry, because we lost everything off the YouTube when we went to it for our live streams. And so Blue Frame came along and we picked them up. I really liked their software, and we were able to do multicam and everything on it, and it was a lot of fun. And so we started doing that. And just prior to the pandemic, I mean, we started in the fall, just before the 2020 lockdown. We were starting to build up some serious momentum as a team. We picked up about 25 different, what I call repetitions, a number of events under our belt just before the lockdown happened. And the last one that we did before the lockdown was we covered all of the sectional games, boys basketball sectional games in our Curry Center. And so even if Mooresville wasn't playing, we covered all the games. And that was a lot of fun. And the viewership that we had by the sectional title game, it was rocking. The place was absolutely rocking. We had people, packed house inside, and quite a few viewers on the outside too. And I knew that we had arrived and we were, as a broadcast team, fully back. And so I was so excited about that. And then the pandemic.
Yeah, the start on YouTube for the live streaming, 2019, the spring semester of the 2018-2019 school year, my freshman year, actually. We started experimenting back with live streams because our executive director at the time, Dylan Gabbard, he really wanted to get into the live streams. He wanted to bring it back. He was a part of that original crew.
Yes.
With the NFHS network. He did a couple of commentating events. I believe he ran camera a couple times. He was very heavily involved in that process.
Yes.
And so when it came, that 2019, when we had the opportunity to bring it back, I did some research and I found a couple apps that would work to try and bring his dream back to life through YouTube. And it was just 3 people. It was Dylan, myself, and just someone else that we could find to do it, to create a small multicam event to go up onto YouTube before we could get our next mode of transportation, which was for the 2019-2020 school year, before the pandemic. We got the Sling Studio, which allows us to actually use our studio cameras to actually live stream those things.
And those of you not familiar with Sling Studio, it's a wireless video system. And so we were able to, place cameras in various locations without a bunch of wires at the time. And we still use that one, but we also now have a fiber optic system where it has a two-way communication of video, bidirectional video, and bidirectional comm system that allows us to communicate with the camera operators, between the director and the camera operators. And so we have a few different types of setups depending on the size of the event and the number of students that we have working each event. We can have as few as 2 or 3 students working an event to as many as 14 or 15 students working in a major fiber event.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see this, and this brings me to my last point of where the program is heading. Like, what's next? What I'm seeing now is program growth from my freshman year with only 10 members, sophomore year, only 10 members again. And then my junior year, so last year, we started to grow. We had 2 different programs going on. We had Interactive Media and Radio TV 1. And how many members did we have roughly?
Roughly, we're at about 45 now. So, we're not back up to the 65 I had earlier, but I see us moving toward that. I think we're going to be there again, maybe even as early as next year. And I'll get to the why of that in here in a moment. But, I'm just so excited to see the program growing and flourishing again. And not just again, but better than where we ever were as far as the total amount of content we're creating, plus the quality of content is constantly improving. We look to other places like Martinsville and Brownsburg, and seeing what they're doing, and because they're further on down the road than we are, and we're getting there. And I think that in due time, our content is going to be at that same caliber. It's just amazing to see the explosive growth that the students are making in such a short period of time. It's only going to keep getting better.
Yeah, and I love seeing what has happened since my freshman year. Just like the quality of content has gone way up, because now that it's not just because it's a college course. That may be part of it in some people's minds, but in my mind, it's just simply because now we have the people that are passionate about creating the content that we create to just be in the program working on these projects that we're putting out on YouTube and on our live streams. It's truly amazing to me to see how this program has really grown, because, as I said, I have seen all 3 studios, all 3 roughly different programs, and I've seen it evolve, and it's just becoming a more beautiful thing. And you said that something is starting to happen with the college courses and stuff. So what is happening next?
The next part here is the pathway, changing from the Indiana Department of Education. They have decided with the graduation pathways that you need to have a principles class. And so the principles of broadcast will be introduced in the next school year, in the 2022-2023 school year. And so the incoming freshmen for next year will be taking that course. And maybe some of our current freshmen will be taking that course. And so that will be the foundational course for learning about broadcast. And so that is going to be brand new next year. And there's concentrator classes that you also have to take along the pathway, a concentrator A and a concentrator B. So in other words, you have to take at least 3 courses to be along a graduation pathway, and broadcast is among them, among your options for a graduation pathway. That excites me because even more people will be passionate about it because that's the pathway they want to graduate with. And so I'm really excited about the future for us on that. Those concentrator A and B courses will be introduced in the following consecutive years. So the people taking principles next year will end up taking concentrator A their sophomore year, concentrator B their junior year. And then there's also an option, I don't believe that it's required for graduation, but there's a capstone experience that they could do, where they could go to, say, WCBK for radio, or go to an Indianapolis station for video. But they could also, I'm hoping that many will stay right here with our own Pioneer TV and do their capstone experience as assistant producers of these live streams that we do.
So I want to leave it off here with one last thing. You mentioned that this new thing that's starting to happen, it might bring up our numbers. It might start flourishing the program even further. What are you expecting from this change?
I think from any era, those who pursue excellence will see the benefits of that. We're a team. We work together. And when you have a larger team that's working together, moving in the same direction together, some great things happen. And so I won't look back to the old Channel 1 days of Wake Up MHS as the golden years. I don't do that. I look forward to the next year, and the next year after that, and the next year after that, as another opportunity to create a new golden year. And whoever wants to be part of that, and to see the benefits of them creating their own content for a specific purpose, for a specific audience, more news for the students and the community, for the live stream events, for those sports fanatics that really want to see the high school athletics. I think it's an exciting time for the radio TV pathway. And those who want to be part of it, we're going to do it with excellence. And you don't have to have experience coming in. We'll train you. You just have to have that passion, like you were mentioning, Xander. That is the key to success in the radio TV pathway.
Well, I think that's it for the Pioneer TV origin story as far as that goes. So I guess if you're interested in the program, you can sign up through Skyward or call the guidance office. And I think that's about it.
And if you want to contact me directly, it's andrew.marine@mooresvilleschools.org. And I would be more than happy to continue a conversation with you directly if you'd like.
Well, thank you for talking to me and to our viewers about how Pioneer TV started and where it's going next.
Thank you for having me.